Well, welcome to our reflection time. The title of the reflection today is an examen of God's presence in our lives. There's so much going on around us. There's so much chaos and uncertainty and conflict that we must return to our center. We must find our foundation again and to remember that it is in God and with God that we truly exist. He is our greater reality. So we're going to begin with a time of silence. And the time of silence just simply helps us to transition from everything that's going on around us or everything that is yet to be done yet today and to become aware of God's presence. Focusing on your breathing can pull your attention from other distractions to your present intention, which is being present with God. So let's go ahead and move from all that is going on around us and toward becoming aware of God's presence here and now. We're going to allow Scripture to guide us through 4 different movements or times of silent reflection. We're going to begin with the beginning of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Our God is a God of relationship, and within himself he holds the sacred dance. Some theologians have called it the perichoresis. It's this constant communion of love between the Father, Son, and Spirit. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, not one thing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of all humanity. So out of God's love was created all life. And that life is the light which resides in each one of us. Never has he abandoned or forsaken us. For as the scripture says, in him we live and move and have our being. So we cannot go back to his beginning. He's the Ancient of Days. He is infinite and we are finite. But at a certain place and time in his story, our light, lit by his own flame, appeared. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I set you apart. God invited us into the dance of the Trinity. We entered perichoresis, the divine dance. And our response is the same as the psalmist in 139. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. God has a memory of you, and it goes back to before you are even able to have a memory of yourself. When you came forth from the womb, he was with you. So it's not God who must draw near to us, for he's never left us. It is we who must draw near to him and become aware of his presence. And so we must remember that in him we live and move and have our being. I'm going to share a story with you from when I was a child. And the reason why I share this with you is because I want you to reflect on some of your early experiences with God, maybe your earliest experience with God, a time when you felt, maybe for the first time, that God saw you. You had a tangible experience of the presence of God. When I was 7 years old, my mom and dad were having a fight. They fought a lot. It got loud and chaotic. And I remember on this day, I left the house and I began walking up the street. I went up the street to where there was a T-section where Cass Avenue and Mendon Road crossed one another. But on the other side of that T-section stood a large Catholic church, St. Joseph's Church. And I remember there is a large statue of an angel outside. It's still there today. And then there was a staircase that led up to some rugged wooden doors. It was late afternoon in the middle of the week, so no one was there when I went inside. The chapel was somewhat familiar to me because I had been there for at least one or two Easter services. But the sanctuary was empty, and I took a seat. I remember it was about midway down the line of pews on the left-hand side. Now, I was 7 years old. I wasn't a churchgoer. I didn't know what to say or how to pray, so I just sat there, knowing that this is where people go to meet with God. I don't know how long I stayed there. It might have been 20, 30 minutes, maybe an hour. I was just there in a silent, empty chapel with magnificent stained glass windows around me. And eventually I felt released to leave. And I remember crossing that street again and heading back down Cass Avenue, walking back toward my house. But while I was walking, something happened. I felt something lift within my chest, and I don't really know how to describe it, but it felt something like joy and hope. I had a deep impression that I had been seen by God. Now, I didn't grow up in the church. I wasn't familiar with the stories of the Bible. I hadn't yet uttered the sinner's prayer. But I had been seen, and I knew that it was good. When was the first time you remember being aware of the tangible presence and reality of God? You may not be able to even describe it with words, but somehow you knew that He was living and active, and that He was aware of you. And if you can't remember a particular moment, I bet you can remember how it felt and what it meant to you. Let's go ahead and begin our first time of silent reflection. We're going to move into the second reflection. I want you to recall a time when life with God was so good that you felt on top of the world. Maybe, as Julian of Norwich said, you knew that all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Again, if you cannot think of a specific moment at will, on demand, simply remember the feeling. Now we're going to move into our third reflection, where you're going to recall a time when the world was not so kind, and you found yourself feeling very alone, lost. But in the midst of it all, you knew God was still there. Deuteronomy 31:36 says, "Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." Our final reflection calls us to embrace the reality of God's presence with us at this very moment in our lives. In whatever situation or circumstances you find yourself, God is here. In Him we live and move and have our being. Our circumstances and the world around us are constantly changing. Just when we get familiar with our surroundings, something is moved. But we are not our circumstances, and our existence is founded on the reality that does not change or shift with the winds or the times. We are rooted in God. We exist within the perichoresis, the triune relationship, which reaches us within both time and place, but is itself established outside of the boundaries of time and within the eternal present. There is a saying that I find very helpful from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He says, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." Everything around you will not only continue to change, but with each passing day it will fade, but you will not fade, because you are rooted in that which does not fade. C.S. Lewis tells us, "For the present is the point at which time touches eternity." Our reality is not that we're locked in time and these present circumstances. Our reality is that we are eternal beings, and what we are experiencing now are just fleeting moments, important moments, but fleeting. But the one thing that will never change is the reality of our relationship with God. One day, this time period we call life on earth will be but a dot in eternity. And your truest reality will be your all-encompassing and sustaining reality. And what reality is that? I am a friend of God, and in Him I live and move and have my being. This is not who you are. You are not lost in God, but found in God. More sure and solid than the earth beneath your feet is the God who upholds you. This is your reality. Return to it again and again. How do you return to it? Psalm 46 tells us, "Be still and know that I am God." For our fourth reflection, having a sense of God's presence is of course our longing, but even when we feel His absence, we can be sure that He has not abandoned us. We appreciate our feelings, but our ultimate trust is in who God is and His promise to us. So in this final reflection, we will simply sit in the silent reality of our existence in the presence of God. I invite you to begin to gently come back to this present time and space. But I hope that this was helpful in helping you to remember your place in God, that in Him you live and move and have your being. Your ultimate and greater reality is that you are part of the divine dance, the triune relationship. And this will always be your reality, your greatest realization. So I invite you to come back to it time and again, to find yourself again, to center yourself again, so that you might know that you do not have to be shaken, for in Him we live and move and have our being.